Okay, this is going to be a refresher video on food webs and energy pyramids. You already have notes on this stuff. We talked about it when we were doing photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So, just a refresher. So, when we talk about food webs or when we talk about food chains, I want you to remember that the arrows represent energy. Okay? So the transfer of energy from one organism to another. So if we have organism A over here and organism B over here, you can think of it as A is eaten by organism B, and therefore organism B gets energy from organism A. The other thing I want you to remember when we're talking about this is that organism A, let's say organism A is a plant, gets its energy from photosynthesis. 90% of that energy, so 90% of energy is used by the organism for metabolism. It gets wasted as heat. So it's not available for organism B, the one that's eating it. So only 10% of energy actually makes it to organism B. So let's look at a food web and then an energy pyramid. All right, so here is a food web looking at kind of maybe a pond ecosystem or river ecosystem. Now over here on the left we have the trophic levels. We can divide them generally up into the autotrophs, okay, producers down here, those organisms that go through photosynthesis. In this case, weeds, grasses, phytoplankton that live in the water, anything that goes through photosynthesis and makes its own energy. Autotrophs, self-feeders. And then everything else, remember, are heterotrophs. And literally it means other feeders, so organisms that consume other organisms in order to get energy. So these are things like our cells, that cells don't contain chloroplasts, they don't go through photosynthesis. Organisms that consume plants, okay, that consume producers, are known as primary consumers. Okay, that's what that 1 degree, primary. So think about first level consumers. They eat producers, also known as herbivores. And then we have secondary consumers. Secondary consumers, okay, such as this bat, which eats a grasshopper, which eats the grass. Secondary consumers are also carnivores. Right, so they eat consumers. Some secondary consumers, such as this mallard duck right here, are omnivores. And remember, an omnivore eats both producers and consumers, plants and animals. So within this food web, we could follow multiple food chains, starting with the grass to the grasshopper, to the bat, and then up here to this eagle. And then everything eventually decomposes, right? So decomposers help to break down dead organisms and return the nutrients back to the soil, or in this case, the water. Detritivores eat kind of organic waste that's falling through the water. We find detritivores in aquatic ecosystems. One other important thing to know about food webs is that the more complex the food web is, the more stable that ecosystem is. So if we think about something happening to this grasshopper, so, there's some sort of plague and all the grasshoppers, die, or 90% of them die. And the bat still has other food sources. The bat eats the krill, it eats other organisms, the mouse eats other organisms, the mallard eats other organisms. So it wouldn't be the end of the world. If it was a very simple food web, then that would be a problem. To tie this back into energy pyramids, remember only 10% of the energy gets passed on to the next level. So the autotrophs make 100% of the chemical energy through photosynthesis, so the glucose, the sugars, the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, all of those things that store energy, all made by the autotrophs, the producers, and then 10% of that energy makes it to the primary consumers, and then 1% to the secondary consumers, and then 0.1% to the tertiary consumers. And so once in a while you get quaternary consumers, or the top level predators, but they're getting 1/100% of the energy. So when we think about this in terms of numbers, okay, or biomass, okay, so biomass, living matter, it decreases as we go from autotrophs right here to primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. That's why in a huge ecosystem you'll have lots and lots of producers and fewer of each. So you won't have, a lot of wolves or eagles living in one area. There's just not enough energy. So that's your recap of food webs and energy pyramids. And if you need more information, go back to your notes. November.